What's happening, everybody? Just letting you know before the video starts, if the script seems kind of sloppy, it's because there isn't one. I'm trying to do a little bit more of a free flow style thing this time around, and if you like it or don't like it, please let me know in the comments. I'm just trying something out. So without further ado, here's the video. Everyone loves the MCU, or at least used to, depending on who you are. The sheer impact that Marvel has had on Hollywood and just filmmaking in general can't be denied, for better or for worse. And one of its biggest byproducts has been the whole idea of the cinematic universe, movies with different characters or brands sharing continuity with one another. And in 2012, when the Avengers hit theaters, everybody started chasing the trend. DC tried their hand with its famous characters, which led to a decade of slop so bad they needed a complete creative overhaul, which I will say has a pretty solid start. James Gunn, I have faith in you. A few others, like Universal and M. Night Shyamalan, gave it a shot, but resulted in movies that were either mediocre or not popular enough to be a big franchise. Sony even tried with actual Marvel characters like Spider-Man, but couldn't get anything off the ground. However, there's one competitor who I think stood out from all of those other ones. 20th Century Fox. A company who owns several Marvel properties and predates the MCU with the X-Men. So what if I told you that years ago, there was a crossover between all of Fox's Marvel characters that could have competed with the Avengers and maybe even the MCU as a whole, but never saw the light of day? Today, that's what we're going to talk about, so let's get started. So, I'll start with the plot details first. Basically, the movie would have opened with the Human Torch, which, everybody knows, Fantastic Four, trying to apprehend the villain Molecule Man, who less people know, but he's basically just a super powerful bad guy, and that's all that's really important here. During the chase, Johnny would go supernova, which is basically like setting off a nuke in the middle of New York City, which would have caused a ton of destruction, obviously, and that would bring about the Superhuman Registration Act. And if you don't know what that is, basically it means that superheroes have to be either approved and licensed by the government, basically becoming part of the military, or they have to retire or become a fugitive. It's by no means a fresh idea. I mean, the whole concept of government-sponsored superheroes has been around in comics for decades, and movies too. I mean, look at things like Watchmen, Dark Knight Returns, and kind of even The Incredibles, but obviously the version that this movie would be basing its plot off of would have been Marvel's event Civil War, which, needs no introduction. Everybody's seen this picture of Iron Man and Captain America, and even more people have seen the movie, so I'm just not even gonna bother. And like the Civil War comic and movie, there would be tons of conflict, with heroes from different teams being put on different sides, and all around just them arguing about what a superhero is, what they mean to people, and whether or not they should be operating on their own free will, or within the confines of the government. One of the major fights would have actually been between Wolverine and Mr. Fantastic, who would have stretched out his arms until they were apparently one molecule wide, turning them into scissors and cutting off Wolverine's arms, which, if I'm being honest, sounds kind of stupid. It kind of sounds like a rejected idea for a Mortal Kombat fatality. Anyways, the featured characters in the movie would have been the Fantastic Four, the X-Men, Daredevil, Gambit, and also Deadpool, which would have been awesome. And the film would end with everybody settling their differences, and there would be a post-credit scene featuring the Skrulls, setting up a secret invasion storyline for possible sequels in the shared universe. The original plans for the movie were being put together around the early 2010s when the MCU was still pretty young and X-Men First Class was in development. Awesome movie, please go watch it. The guys working on First Class were also writing this as a secret project, and Fox initially wanted to get Paul Greengrass to direct, who had previously worked on the Jason Bourne movies, so he had a lot of credibility at the time. Apparently, him and Fox had a few discussions, but he was never actually hired, and after the success of X-Men First Class, this crossover was scrapped so the mainline X-Men movies could keep going. But then, in 2013, a newer version of the crossover was announced, which would have seen Dr. Doom using mind control to get the X-Men and Fantastic Four to fight, which is kind of another comic pull, but this was cancelled too. And apparently it would have been handled by Simon Kinberg, who's famous for working on all of the X-Men movies, the good ones, the bad ones, and the perfect ones. I do want to talk about the potential that this kind of crossover had, but before I do, I want to touch more on the production problems, the biggest of which being character rights. I kind of mentioned at the beginning of this video that Fox had rights to a lot of different Marvel characters, and that's because in the 90s, Marvel was facing some serious financial issues, so they sold off the film rights to a bunch of the different characters. So Spider-Man went to Sony, obviously, Hulk went to Universal, Blade went to New Line Cinema, I believe, but Fox ended up getting things like X-Men and the Fantastic Four. And that's how we ended up getting all of the cheesy superhero movies from the 2000s that a lot of people probably remember from their childhoods, whether they wish to or not.
Bullseye.
The copyright for all these movies is kind of weird, because obviously Deadpool and the X-Men were owned by Fox, but Daredevil and Fantastic Four were a little bit different despite what I just said. Constantine Films owned the First Family, while New Regency had The Man Without Fear, and Fox only distributed the movies from the 2000s. And on top of that, New Regency hadn't released anything Daredevil related since 2005 with Jennifer Garner's Elektra, so the rights for him and his associates were returned back to Marvel, and that means he couldn't be used in the crossover. Which I'd say is a pretty acceptable loss, because that's how we got Charlie Cox's Daredevil in the MCU. Please let Born Again be good. Like, I love Daredevil almost as much as I love Iron Fist, and he got complete trash, and the Fantastic Four was a completely different animal. Now, after the first crossover was scrapped to keep the mainline X-Men movies going, Fox also wanted to reboot the Fantastic Four from the 2000s movies, so they brought in Josh Trank to direct and Jeremy Slater to write, who both had considerable talent. Problem was, neither of them could agree on the movie they wanted to make. Trank, who had just come off the back of his movie Chronicle, wanted to do a realistic, grotesque body horror type movie, which probably would have been similar to the Ultimate comics, because a similar concept was used there. But on the other hand, Slater wanted to show a more heroic origin story, which would have seen the Fantastic Four, along with Doctor Doom, traveling to the Negative Zone to get their powers and facing off against Annihilus, who's a villain from the comics. And on top of that, Mole Man was supposed to appear with some giant mutated monster, and the movie would have ended with the Four fighting an army of Doombots in Latveria, which would have looked like Saving Private Ryan apparently, and there would have been a post-credit scene teasing Galactus for a sequel. Said sequel would have seen Galactus as the main villain, with Doctor Doom doing his bidding, basically filling in the role of Silver Surfer. I want to say both of these ideas had a lot of potential. I mean, Trank's whole body horror thing, like I said earlier, would have been very similar to the Ultimate Universe's version of the Fantastic Four, so that would have been cool. But Jeremy Slater's version also sounds like just like a sick love letter to the comics. I mean, with a list of villains like Doctor Doom, Annihilus, and Mole Man, who is just a complete cornball, and then Galactus thrown in there as a post-credit scene, it feels like a fever dream, man. It feels like a movie I don't even think the MCU would try to do. The new Fantastic Four movie coming out doesn't seem to look anything like this. Unfortunately, though, no matter the potential of either of these movies, the arguing between Trank, Slater, and Fox was too much. Trank's movie would have been too dark, Slater's movie would have been too expensive, and there were also concerns about the casting, so Fox just did a ton of studio interference and reshoots and junk, and that's how we ended up getting the 2015 Fantastic Four movie.
Say that again?
Yes, that one. Following this, apparently there were plans of the Fantastic Four from this movie showing up in Deadpool 2 instead of the X-Force, which would have been a terrible idea. As well as this, the quality of the X-Men movies had completely plummeted, and anything to do with Gambit was stuck in development hell, and that basically spelled the end for any potential crossovers Fox had planned. And I mean, even though all of these cancelled spin-offs and sequels and crossovers never came to fruition, it's still cool to at least speculate on what this could have been. There was never really a confirmed cast, but you could probably say that Hugh Jackman's Wolverine was going to be there, Channing Tatum might have gotten to show up as Gambit before the MCU ever let him, and Ryan Reynolds might have been able to do a recognizable Deadpool before he bullied Fox into making one. Maybe some of the X-Men from First Class would have been there, but it's impossible to say. Same for Daredevil and the Fantastic Four. All of this could have been a really cool crossover, and if it really was going to be reminiscent of Civil War, then I could imagine all kinds of cool fight scenes and set pieces. Some obvious ones like Human Torch versus Iceman, or Colossus versus The Thing, but then you could get something cool like Invisible Woman using one of her force fields to cut off Deadpool's arm, but he just grows it back. I mean, in the comics, the Fantastic Four broke up, and Daredevil was put in jail for going against the act, so that could have been cool to see. And if the post-credit scene with the Skrulls would have led to anything, a Secret Invasion movie with all of these characters would have been so much better than the MCU show. I mean, you could show the Skrulls kidnapping some of the heroes and learning how to copy their powers, and then they have to escape the ship, kind of like in Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes. Love that show, by the way. And I mean, you could probably show the original Super Skrull with all the powers of the Fantastic Four, plus one that has Wolverine's claws and Iceman's ice abilities or something like that. It would be so cool. Now, again with the character rights, I don't know if Skrulls are more Fantastic Four or Avengers or what have you, because I know they debuted in Fantastic Four, but they've kind of fought everybody else in the Marvel Universe, so it's hard to say for sure. And there's all I have for you today. I was just reading about all of these different canceled movies and what this cinematic universe could have looked like, and I wanted to share it because I feel like with the Fantastic Four and the X-Men on the horizon of the MCU following the Secret Wars movie, it's still worth it to take a look back at what was, similar to how Deadpool and Wolverine kind of paid tribute to the whole Fox era of Marvel. Plus, like I said at the beginning, it was a way for me to test out a more non-scripted freestyle format. With all that being said, thank you so much for watching today's video. Be sure to like and subscribe if you want to see more like it. I apologize on the slow uploads, school's been really busy, but the next video will be Comic Comparison Episode 9, I promise. Leave your thoughts and opinions in the comments below, have a good holiday season, and I'll see you nerds later.
Tell me why it ain't nothing but a holiday. Tell me why it ain't nothing but a mistake. Tell me why I never wanna hear you say I want it that way.